Have you ever stood before a child's grave and felt like the earth remembered more than you ever could? That the wind itself was whispering names it had said too many times? Good evening, dear reader, wherever you're watching from whatever time. It is I need you to sit with this question. If the same children kept dying, lifetime after lifetime, would you call it a curse or a crime? Tonight, we begin the story of Elijah and Elias Harrow, the twins who died in every lifetime. November 2nd, 1855, Harrow Farm, Grayridge County, Illinois. The frost was already thick by dawn. Beneath the ash-colored sky, two small wooden coffins sat side by side in the parlor of the Harrow farmhouse, each one carved by hand by their father, Reverend Josiah Harrow. No flowers, no mourning guests, only the smell of pine resin and lied-out. Reverend Harrow stood over them, his hands raw and red, clutching a worn Bible whose spine was so broken it flopped like a wounded bird. His lips moved in silent prayer. His eyes, however, were not fixed on the heavens but on the thin white scar that ran across Elias's chin, a mark that had been there since the boy's birth, a mark that Josiah had seen before, in another time. On another boy, Sarah Harrow, their mother, sat motionless in a rocking chair that hadn't rocked in hours. Her shawl slid from one shoulder, unnoticed, her gaze blank, her mind lost. I did what I was told, Josiah muttered, as if trying to assure himself. They were marked. No doctor had been called, no town record made. The boys were said to have died of a sudden chill, but everyone in Grayridge knew better than to ask, just like they hadn't asked in 1827, or 1792, or 1734. That evening, Harrow family burial plot. Behind the barn the graves were shallow. The ground was hard and would freeze before morning. Josiah dug as the light vanished. Ignoring the way his knees creaked and his breath wheezed, he hummed a hymn under his breath, one not found in any book. It was a melody passed down from a preacher older than the land itself, a tune that accompanied cleansing. That's what he called it, cleansing. Each thud of the shovel was punctuated by a flicker of doubt, quickly buried. He remembered the drawing Elias made the week before, an almost perfect rendering of a manor that no longer existed. The boy claimed he'd lived there before, said there were maids and fire and a tower with red glass, said Elijah used to jump from that tower when it was time. Josiah burned the drawing, but it hadn't burned easily. December 11th, 1855. 1 month later, strangers had begun arriving in Grayridge. A few came by train, others in carriages that didn't belong to the area. Most left as quickly as they came, but one stayed. Dr. Lucien Thorne, a man with a silver cane and a case full of surgical tools, said he was here to study the effects of generational trauma in isolated towns. No one believed that. He was too pale, too quiet, and far too interested in the local graveyard. At the general store, he asked the shopkeep, "Have there ever been other twin boys buried here? Children who died, strangely?" The shopkeep, a blunt woman named Nettie, said nothing, just crossed herself and rang him up. That night, Dr. Thorne walked the perimeter of the Harrow property, counting every stone. He found 5 graves of twin boys, all under the names Elias and Elijah. The earliest was dated 1734, the most recent 10 days ago. Same names, same ages, same scar etched into the face of Elias described in each burial record like a signature no one could erase. And yet, no official town record matched those dates. It was as if the boys never lived, or were never allowed to, in the woods beyond Harrow Farmdar. Thorne came upon something buried in snow, a rusted iron ring poking through the earth. He cleared the frost, revealing a trapdoor. No building stood above it. The door groaned when opened. Inside, stairs, damp stone, and the stench of old ash. On the walls were symbols, not crosses, but something older. Between them, candle stubs, and long decayed cloth. A ritual space at the far end. 2 crude dolls lay on an altar, one with a scar on its chin. Thorn didn't touch anything, but he did notice the blood, still wet, and a small, muddy footprint that hadn't faded. Meanwhile, inside the Harrow house, Sarah Harrow, now gaunt and wild-eyed, locked herself in the boys' room. She had not spoken since their burial, but tonight, she whispered. "They're not gone," she said to no one. "They're never gone." She opened the chest at the foot of the bed and pulled out the old drawings hidden from Josiah. One of them showed the same manner Elias had drawn. Another, older, in crumbling parchment, showed a pyre. Atop it, 2 figures, hands bound, heads bowed. Above them, a phrase in Latin, ad vitam damnati, revertentur, death to life. "They will return." She began to weep. Midnight, the first knock. Thorn, writing by candlelight in his rented room, paused when he heard it. Knock, knock, slow, deliberate, at the window, not the door. He stood, approached. There, pressed against the frost glass, 2 small handprints, the same size. Side by side, he opened the window. Nothing, only snow swirling in silence. But then, faintly, behind him in the room, 2 small sets of footsteps. He turned. Darkness. If the dead return, it is only because the living keep calling them back. The prints were gone by morning. Dr. Lucian Thorn pressed his hand against the cold window pane, searching for signs he hadn't imagined. The twin palm prints, side by side, delicate, impossibly perfect. No wind could have carved them. No frost could have mimicked the arcs of tiny fingers. He hadn't slept. The candle had burned out hours ago, leaving the room damp with shadow. But something lingered. A smell, faint but distinct. Ash, pine resin, and lye. The same scent that had clung to the air in the Harrow parlor, back at Harrow Farm, December 12, 1855. Sarah Harrow had not slept either. She'd spent the night kneeling by the hearth, whispering to someone who wasn't there. Her fingers were raw from gripping the old drawings, and her voice hoarse from prayers that didn't sound like scripture. "Where are they now?" she asked aloud. The floorboards creaked in answer. Soft steps overhead. She stood suddenly, breath hitching, heart pounding. Josiah had gone to the churchyard before. She was alone. She took the stairs slowly, calling out, "Elijah, Elias." "Number," answered Dot at the top landing. The door to the boys' room stood open. Inside, the beds were still made, but in the dust on the windowsill were 2 fresh handprints. In town, Grayridge Church Archives. Dr. Thorn, ever composed, approached the church under the guise of scholarly research. He had written ahead, requesting access to old parish records, births, baptisms, burials. What he found was more than he hoped for. The records were inconsistent. For every 20 years, there were notations of twin boys deceased, always around the same age, always under mysterious circumstances. The names changed, occasionally, and Elijah, Ewan, and Edward, Eli and Elam, but the initials always remained the same, E&E. The oldest entry dated back to 1734. Scrawled in weathered ink beside a red wax seal from a preacher named Rev. Cornelius Harrow, twins born under blood moon, marked by the scar, buried in fire, and sealed in covenant. May they never return, lest sin take root again. Thorn's fingers froze over the page. The same family line, the same ritual phrase, sealed in covenant. But what covenant? Midday, Sarah's awakening. Sarah Harrow had left the house by the time Josiah returned. He found the boys' room undisturbed, save for the fact that every drawing Elias ever made had been removed. Only one remained pinned to the wall with a long iron nail. It wasn't a drawing. It was a map, a simple sketch of the Harrow property, with an X drawn behind the barn, not where the graves were, but deeper, near the forest edge where the trapdoor had been found. Josiah ripped it down and threw it into the fire. He didn't notice the identical copy already hanging in the root cellar below. Elsewhere, the town's midwife speaks. Thorne paid a visit to the outskirts of town, where the retired midwife, Adeline Crow, lived in a cottage that smelled of crushed herbs and vinegar. She had delivered both boys in the winter of 1847. They were silent, she told him, hands shaking as she poured tea. Didn't cry, just stared at each other, like they were already speaking. And the scar? Thorne asked. She nodded. Elias had it from birth. I thought it was a birthmark at first, but I'd seen it before. When? Her eyes darkened. 1827. Another pair. Same house, same mother's bloodline. They didn't last a full year. And what became of them? She didn't answer at first. Then, after a long breath, burned in the barn. The Reverend said it was a judgment from God, but it wasn't fire that took them. It was belief. That night, December 12, 1855, Sarah stood at the edge of the woods, holding a lantern, following a sound only she could hear. It was soft like humming, two voices, overlapping, singing a tune no child should know. The forest opened into a small clearing. At its center, a stone well, long covered with moss and iron lattice. The X on Elias's map had led here. She dropped to her knees beside it and whispered, "I remember now." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but recognition. "You weren't the first. I wasn't the first. But this time, I will not let it end the same way." She pulled a small bundle from her shawl, two tiny shoes, still muddy, and dropped them into the well. The singing stopped. Meanwhile, Reverend Harrow's discovery back in the church. Josiah stood alone in the small room behind the pulpit. He had not prayed in hours. He was searching, digging through his father's books, ledgers of strange names and oaths, maps of stars, and cycles of eclipses. At the center of one book, a hand-drawn family tree stretched back to 1702. Each generation had two names circled in red. Twins, boys, all ending in a Latin phrase, sacrificium per purificationem, sacrifice through purification. Josiah slammed the book shut, hands trembling. His family hadn't been cursed. They had been complicit. Dr. Thorne's journal, final entry for the night December 12th, 1855. I fear I've stepped into something far older than I understand. These children are not just repeating history, they are its prisoners. Their deaths are not accidents, they are ritual. I believe the Harrow lineage, beginning with Cornelius in 1730, formate a pact, a twisted belief that these twins bore the sins of some ancient crime, and every time they were reborn, they were cleansed again. But what if the boys weren't the curse? What if they were the key? Tonight, I will return to the trapdoor in the woods. I need to see what lies below, truly, and if I don't return, let this journal serve as record. The Harrow twins died in every lifetime, because someone made sure they did. Every time they were born, someone was already waiting to bury them. Are you still with us, listener? Good, because it's not just the past we're walking through. Now it's a pattern, like a script written in blood, reenacted by children who never got to choose their roles. Tonight, we descend beneath the forest floor, where wood and stone remember more than flesh ever could, where truth was buried, not to be forgotten, but to be hidden. December 12th, 1855. Near midnight, the forest well trapdoor, behind Harrow Farm. Lucian Thorne held his lantern low as he descended the narrow steps below the trapdoor. The stone was slick with moss and time. Each footstep echoed with unnatural clarity, as if the chamber itself listened. The air grew colder, not just from the chill, but from something older, heavier. The smell of lye was stronger here. That same acrid blend of soap, blood, and burnt wood that followed the Harrow twins to every grave. 20 steps down, the passage opened into a low, circular room. Thorn froze. The walls were carved with names, not prayers, not psalms, names, dozens of them, some etched deep into the limestone, others painted in drying blood. Always in pairs, always male, always beginning with E. Elias and Elijah, 1855. Eliam and Everett, -1827. Edwin and Enoch, 1792. Elias and Elric, -1768. Ephraim and Elias, 1734. Beneath the names, the same Latin phrase appeared again and again, repetitio, per purgationem, repetition, through cleansing. At the center of the chamber was a stone slab and altar, clearly stained, scarred, chained at the edges, and on it, a fresh pair of muddy footprints, tiny bare. Elsewhere Sarah's memory returns by candlelight. Sarah sat alone on the boy's bed, whispering the name Elias again and again, as though it were a hymn. But her mind was not in 1855 anymore. She saw fire, a tower window shattered by screams, a doctor in 1827, cutting into her sons to release the memories, a village in 1734, chanting. As they watched her twins tied to an ash tree, she had been the mother in every lifetime. They had come through her, again and again, and every time she had failed them, until now. Dr. Thorne, deeper into the crypta. Altar chamber was only the beginning. A second passage lay hidden behind a rotted curtain of canvas. Thorne ducked inside, brushing away cobwebs, and gasped. Jars, dozens, lined on wooden shelves, each one filled with fluid and something preserved. Small bones, locks of hair, tiny teeth, all labeled, all tagged. Ian E1827, 1792 1768. Artifacts of every previous set of twins, and beside them a book, a leather-bound ledger with the Harrow family crest. The book of second by Art H.S. Thorne flipped it open with shaking hands. Each entry began with the same line: twins born beneath, eclipse soul mark present, reborn before cycle's end. It detailed methods to detect cursed twins, signs of memory from past lives, and instructions on ritual extinguishment to prevent return. And in the margin, written in different ink, one note, repeated like a curse: they always remember by age 8. Back at the Harrow house, Reverend Josiah stood in his study, staring at the burned map in the fireplace. But the heat did nothing to warm the chills settling into his bones. The family tree haunted him now. Every Harrow man had participated. His father, his grandfather, back to Cornelius Harrow. All devout men who claimed their acts were holy. But he no longer believed that. He opened a locked drawer and pulled out a yellowed letter sealed in wax. It was addressed to him from his father, written just before his death. Josiah, if you are reading this, it means the cycle has begun again. You will feel doubt. That is normal. The twins must be returned. You will know them by the scar and the dreams. They do not belong in this world. If you do not act, the past will seep into the future, and we none of us will escape it. Father, his hand trembled. He could no longer tell which was more terrifying, the thought that the twins were cursed, or the thought that they were innocent. Dr. Thorne, the final chamber, the tunnel opened into one last space, a small crypt, octagonal in shape, with a single stained glass window at the top, letting in pale moonlight. In the center stood 2 child-sized coffins, fresh, empty, and next to them, a music box. He opened it. It played a familiar melody, one he had heard, humming in the woods, the same tune the townsfolk refused to name, the same one Sarah had been humming in her sleep. Thorne dropped the box. It shattered, and behind him, 2 soft footsteps. He turned. 2 boys stood in the tunnel's mouth, identical, pale, silent. One had a scar on his chin. Elias. He breathed. Neither answered, but they smiled. Final scene. The returning memory. Sarah ran from the house, lanterns swinging in the cold wind. following an instinct stronger than fear. She reached the trapdoor behind the barn and dropped to her knees. Her hands fumbled at the iron ring. She heaved it open and froze. From the darkness below, she heard it laughter. Two boys, laughing softly, not cruel, not scared, free. For the first time in any lifetime, they were free. The lie was never meant to protect the children. It was meant to protect the legacy. Would you believe a story if it began to repeat itself, name for name, death for death? Or would you tell yourself it's just coincidence? Tonight, the Harrow bloodline will finally face the mirror it spent over a century avoiding. And when you look into it with them, you might not like what looks back. December 13th, 1855, just before sunrise below Harrow Farm, the forgotten crypto. Lucy and Thorne stood frozen as the two boys stepped fully into the moonlit chamber. Their skin was pale but unblemished, save for the faint scar on the chin of the one on the left. Elias, if the pattern held, they didn't speak. They simply stood there, watching him. And then, they moved in perfect synchronous, circling the room, their feet making no sound across the cold stone. Elias stopped by one of the jars on the wall. Inside it floated a jawbone too small to be adult, labeled 1827E&E. The boy raised his eyes to meet Thorne's. "You've seen this before?" the boy whispered. His voice was too calm, too certain. "Yes," Thorne replied quietly. "I've seen it written, but never like this." Elijah, at least, the one without the scar, approached the broken music box on the floor. He knelt, picked up a piece of it, and whispered, "We remember now." Thorne swallowed. "Remember what?" "The fire," Elijah said. "The tower," Elias added. "The rope," Elijah finished. Then they both said together, "We remember every time." At the house, Sarah's reckoning, the sun crept over the horizon, but the Harrow house remained steeped in shadow. Sarah stood before the mirror in the boys' bedroom, clutching an old brooch to her chest, a copper pin passed down from her mother. She had never opened the back of it before. She never dared. But this morning, something inside told her, "Look." With shaking fingers, she pried it open. Inside, a faded photo of two boys, early 1800s. Eyes wide, dressed in Victorian frock coats. On the back, scrawled in slanted ink, Elijah and Elias Gradich. 1827, it wasn't just her children who kept returning. It was her, too. She remembered a carriage accident in 1792, a drowning in 1768, and flames. Always flames. Her role had never changed. She was the mother. And she had always failed to save them, until now. Reverend Josiah Harrow. The last confession. Josiah sat in the church pews long after the morning bell had tolled, his Bible lying closed on his lap. He had not preached. He had not prayed. He had read every page in the Harrow family book and found no redemption, only repetition. Cornelius Harrow, the originator of the cycle, had been a zealous Puritan preacher, obsessed with the doctrine of original sin, reborn. When twin boys were born to his own daughter in 1734, he saw them not as children, but as omens. Evidence of a generational curse passed through blood. He bound the family to a secret doctrine. Whenever the twins returned, they must be sacrificed before age 8 to prevent corruption of the world. Each generation had complied, some reluctantly, others proudly. Josiah stood slowly and walked to the pulpit, staring out into the empty chapel. His voice cracked as he whispered aloud, "We were never cleansing the evil, we were creating it." In the woods, Sarah finds the boy's lantern in hand. Sarah returned to the crypt entrance just as the last of the morning frost was burning off the grass. She descended the stairs, step by step, heart pounding, heart pounding. She found them in the altar room, seated calmly across from Dr. Thorne. They looked at her without fear. They smiled. "My darlings," she whispered. "You're really here. We always come back," Elias said. "But you never remember in time," Elijah added. "I do now," Sarah replied. I remember everything. She crossed the room and pulled them into her arms. Neither resisted. Thorn stood nearby, stunned. I've studied reincarnation for 10 years, he murmured. I never thought I'd see proof. It's not reincarnation, Elias said quietly. It's punishment. Sarah's hands trembled. No, my love, not this time. She looked at Thorn. They need to leave this place, the Harrow land. It's what binds them. Every time they're born here, it starts again. But if they go somewhere new, somewhere untouched maybe. Thorn nodded, understanding. There's a train to Chicago tomorrow, he said. I can take them. That night, Josiah walked the perimeter of his land with a lantern in one hand and his father's Bible in the other. He stopped at the burial plot behind the barn. 5 sets of headstones, 10 names, 5 generations of Elijahs and Eliezers. He dropped to his knees. For 100 years, we told ourselves we were saving the world, but we were only saving ourselves from shame. He opened the Bible and tore out the family tree. Page by page, he burned it. Then he took a spade and began digging, not to bury, but to unearth. He would dig until the truth had no place left to hide. Last seen, at the train station, December 14, 1855 dawn. A light snow fell as Sarah and Dr. Thorne stood on the edge of the wooden platform, the twins bundled beside them. The boys stared out at the tracks. They weren't afraid. They looked ready. Will we come back? Elias asked. Not if I can help it, Sarah said gently, kissing his head. Dr. Thorne placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. We're going to write a new chapter, boys, one no one else has written. The train whistles sounded in the distance, but just before they boarded, Elijah looked back toward the horizon, toward the direction of the Harrow land, and whispered, one of them still remembers. What's buried in silence grows roots in every generation. How do you break a curse born from belief, when the past is not only remembered, but worshipped? Tonight, the train carries the twins toward a new future, but the past isn't done with them yet, because some truths weren't meant to be escaped, only confronted. December 14th, 1855. The train to Chicago. The rail car rattled and hissed through miles of snow-covered prairie. Inside, the twins sat close together, staring out the window in silence. Sarah dozed beside them, her hand wrapped protectively around Elijah's. Across from them sat Dr. Thorne, flipping through the worn pages of the Book of Second Births, which he had hidden inside his satchel. Every few pages, strange illustrations. Appeared eclipses, conjoined shadows, and always twin boys bound in rope or flame. He couldn't stop thinking about what Elias had whispered before boarding. One of them still remembers. What did that mean? Back in Grayridge, Reverend Josiah Harrow, Josiah hadn't slept. He had spent the night digging. Beneath the last row of headstones, his spade struck something hard timber. A buried chest, old iron-bound, sealed with wax, and etched with the Harrow, SIGIL. He broke it open with trembling hands. Inside, parchments burned and blackened, scattered pages from journals, personal letters, ritual instructions. One sheet remained mostly intact. At the top, a name, Cornelius Harrow, -1732. The entry read, "The boys appeared again, just as the stars foretold. Born to my own blood, the left one bears the mark. They remember things they should not, faces they've never seen, words they never learned. My forebears were right. These are not children, they are vessels. If allowed to live, they will bring down the Harrow line, and worse, they may bring others with them." At the bottom of the page was a strange symbol. 2 circles entwined, each with a line splitting through them. Not a cross, not Christian, older en route, the stranger in the last car Dr. Thorne left the boys momentarily to retrieve water from the dining car. The train was nearly empty, only 5 other passengers visible, but one man sat alone in the final car, his hat pulled low, face shadowed by the brim. He hadn't boarded in Greyridge. In fact, Thorne hadn't seen him board at all. When Thorne passed him, the man spoke without lifting his head. "You can take them as far as the rails stretch, Doctor, but they'll still remember." Thorne turned slowly. "Excuse me." The man finally looked up. His eyes were pale gray, rimmed with red. His voice low, almost without breath. "You think removing them from the soil will cleanse them, but the soil was just the mirror. The curse is in the blood, and blood remembers." Before Thorne could reply, the man stood and walked toward the back of the train. He opened the final door leading to the open track behind and vanished into the blizzard. Chicago arrival at the stations. Snow blanketed the streets as they stepped off the train. The city was louder, denser than brick buildings towered overhead, and chimneys smoked into the gray sky. Dr. Thorne led the group through the crowd, his grip firm on the twins' hands. He had arranged for them to stay in the home of a trusted associate, a widow named Henrietta Ashcroft, who ran a boarding house for war orphans. "She's kind," he told Sarah. "She won't ask questions, and she won't tell anyone your names." But even as they walked, he felt it again, that sensation, being watched. That evening, Henrietta Ashcroft's boarding house. The house was warm, curtains drawn, firelight glowing in every room. Henrietta welcomed them with a kind smile and a gentle demeanor. She served stew and hot tea, letting the boys pick their own room. "This one," Elijah said, pointing to a second-floor room at the end of the hall. "Why that one?" Sarah asked. "I've seen it before." Henrietta looked surprised. "You couldn't have. It's the only room I never rent. Locked it after my husband passed." "Was his name Ephraim?" Elias asked suddenly. Henrietta's face drained of color. How do you know that?" Neither boy answered. Midnight, Elias's dream in his sleep. Elias tossed and turned. Sweat soaked the sheets. He stood barefoot in a stone corridor, lit by flickering torches. Ahead, a door pulsed with red light. He opened it. Inside, all there. Deaths, in fire, in water, in ash, hung from trees, drowned in basins, cut open under starlight, and always someone watching, a man with gray eyes, not aging, never changing, just watching. Recording. When Elias woke, his sheets were cold and wet, not with sweat, with salt water. Elsewhere, Josiah's letter, that same night. Reverend Josiah Harrow penned a letter and sealed it in wax. He sent it by courier to Chicago, addressed to Dr. Lucian Thorne. Inside was no greeting, only one line. It was never a curse to be born again, only to be remembered. Final scene. The shadow returns as Sarah tucked the twins into bed. She heard a soft knock on the door downstairs. She checked her watch. 1:06 a.m., too late for visitors. She stepped down the staircase quietly. The knock came again. Not frantic, just patient. She opened the door cautiously. No one stood there, just snow falling in silence. She was about to close it when she looked down. 2 fresh sets of footprints in the snow, leading into the house. Some bloodlines are born to remember. Others are born to erase. December 15th, Chicago Ashcroft Boarding House, 4:17 a.m. The house was still, not silent still. There was no wind outside, no creaks in the floorboards, no ticking from the clock. Only a heaviness, as though the entire house had inhaled and forgotten how to breathe. Sarah jolted awake. Something was wrong. She couldn't explain it, only feel it. A sensation crawling just beneath her skin, like the memory of a scream. She rose from bed, barefoot, lantern in hand, and walked slowly toward the boys' room. The door was open inside. Elias sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes wide open, whispering, in a language Sarah didn't recognize. Elijah was fast asleep, but his lips were moving, mimicking his brother. At the same time, Dr. Thorne's apartment, Lucian Thorne, couldn't sleep either. The letter from Reverend Josiah Harrow lay open. On his desk, he had read the final line 20 times. It was never a curse to be born again, lonely to be remembered. Beside the letter sat the oldest item in Thorne's possession, a crude woodcut head, stolen as a boy from the burned-out chapel of New Belhaven. It showed 2 infant twins, one with a scar on his chest, the other with a mark behind his left ear. The same markings Elias and Elijah had. He had always believed it was superstition, but now he wasn't so sure, because the woodcut was dated 1743, and the caption below, it read, "The witnesses must not speak." 5:02 a.m., Elias begins to speak. Sarah kneeled beside Elias. He didn't blink, didn't look at her. He kept whispering. Name kept repeating in his broken, trance-like rhythm. Nemesis, Nemesis. Sarah shook him gently. Elias, you're dreaming. Wake up. At her touch, his body stiffened, then went limp. A moment later, his eyes focused. Is he here? He asked softly. Who? The man with no heart? Who told you that? But Elias didn't answer. Back in Gradage, Josiah's hidden journal, Reverend Harrow sat alone in the rectory, reading from the forbidden family journal he had sworn never to open. Page after page described what the Harrow bloodline had been tasked with doing, not preaching, not healing, but guarding a memory that must never be allowed to spread. The first entry from 1689, written by Theodric Harrow, read, "The twins arrive once every 2 lifetimes. Always boys, always under the frost moon. They are not demons, but conduits. They do not remember past lives. They remember before life, before birth, before earth. They hold the memory of where we came from, when what followed us here." Josiah slammed the journal shut, his hands shaking. Chicago, the spiral on the basement wall that morning. Sarah noticed Elias sketching in the margins of a newspaper. He was drawing spirals, interlocking ones. Dozens of them. "Where did you see that?" she asked. "In the basement," he replied. "There is no basement." Elias just smiled, but Sarah checked. Behind the pantry shelf in the kitchen beneath a crooked tile, she found a small trapdoor, dusty, locked from the inside. When she called for Henrietta Ashcroft, the woman's face went pale. "That part of the house isn't real," Henrietta whispered. "My husband built it. He used to go down there too." "Listen to what?" Henrietta didn't answer. That night, the door opens at midnight. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, a narrow wooden staircase leading into pitch darkness. No breeze, no sound, just pressure, like being watched through skin. Sarah descended first, lantern shaking in her hand. The twins followed without being told. At the bottom, they found an earthen chamber, circular and crude. The walls were painted with the same spirals Elias had drawn. In the center, a single slab of stone, stained and chipped. Beside it, wrapped in old burlap bones, small ones, children's bones. Elias stepped forward and touched a slab. Immediately, the walls began to hum, not in sound, but in memory. He gasped and whispered, "This is where we were broken." The memory floods back. Elias and Elijah collapsed to the ground, clutching their skulls, as waves of something ancient spilled into their minds. Images, smells, sounds, a desert of black glass, a moonless sky, a voice without mouth or body. "You will not carry this into the next world." And fire, always fire burning through lifetimes. And one command, repeated again and again. "Forget, forget." Thorne's arrival. Dr. Thorne burst through the trapdoor moments later, having received Sarah's frantic message. He stood in the doorway, horrified. "You found it," he whispered. "Found what?" Sarah asked. He pointed to the spirals. "That's not just a symbol. It's a seal. A seal for what? For the memory that shouldn't have survived the fall of man. The final revelation." Elijah rose to his feet. His voice was not his own. It was layered, dozens of voices speaking through him at once. "He is near. the one who eats memory. He follows us from birth to birth, and in every life, we forget, but not this time. Elias turned to Dr. Thorne. You thought we were cursed, but we're not. We're keys, and someone has already turned the lock. Suddenly, the spirals began to spin, not physically, but in the eye. A vortex pulling memory, light, and time inward. From the corner of the room, a shape emerged, tall, featureless, wrapped in black thread that moved like worms beneath skin. It had no face, but its eyes were exactly like the man on the train, gray, rimmed in red. The boys turned to face it, unafraid. Some echoes refuse to fade, no matter how many lifetimes you bury them beneath. The midwinter air sat unmoving over Black Hollow, as a second silence settled deeper than snow, the silence not of nature resting, but of something watching. Pastor Silas Merrick watched through the cracked glass of the chapel window, his candle casting long, quivering shadows across the floor. His sermon for Sunday was unfinished, not for lack of scripture, but because of what he'd seen 3 nights ago. He hadn't spoken of it, not even to Sister Bettia, who usually knew his thoughts before he said them. He had seen the twins, or something shaped like them, standing barefoot on the frozen pond behind the chapel. White gowns, no footprints in the snow, and eyes like the stillness before a scream. When he blinked, they were gone, and yet, a child's voice had whispered inside his mind for hours after, "They remember everything." Elias had spent the past day searching the woods behind the old Baines property. The journal's final entries, with erratic handwriting and broken script, had mentioned something cryptically: "Follow the path where birds never sing. The soil remembers." Now, as he tramped through a snow-covered trail, thick with ash-gray birch, not a single chirp touched the air. The deeper he moved into the hollow, the more unnatural it felt, like the wind held its breath. He came upon it slowly, a low mound, almost a perfect circle, where the snow had refused to settle. Dead leaves, black earth, and at the center, 2 small grave markers made of slate. No names, just crude engravings. A sensation like vertigo struck Elias. The grave was older than any record he'd seen, not registered in church ledgers, not mentioned in the town archives. As if the land itself had tried to forget. Then he heard it. A creaking sound behind him. He turned. Nothing, then a whisper. "You shouldn't be here." He spun again, this time, catching a glimpse of something darting behind a tree. Small, fast. Elias backed away, heart slamming, and nearly tripped over the gravestone. When he caught his breath again, the forest had returned to stillness, but the whisper repeated. Now, from a new direction, "They remember you, Elias. In every lifetime." Back in the village, Sister Bettia sat beside Judith Merrick, who still hadn't spoken since the funeral. The girl hadn't eaten much, either, her gaze always fixed on the frost-covered window, her lips twitching as if rehearsing words she didn't dare say aloud. Bettia had brought her warm broth. Judith ignored it. Finally, Bettia placed a hand gently on the girl's arm. "Judith, child, do you remember anything from that night?" The girl blinked, then slowly nodded. "They were singing," she whispered. "Not just the twins, others too. From the woods." Bettia's hand tightened on the girl's arm. "What others, darling?" Judith's pupils dilated. "People I don't know, but they know me." She stood abruptly, knocking over the bowl. Broth splashed across the floor. Her breathing quickened, eyes distant. "There was a woman, in a veil. She put salt in our mouths, said it was to keep the cycle from completing. But the salt tasted like ashes." Bettia's hands trembled. That old rite was no longer spoken of, not since the early settlement days. The ash blessing, it was called, used to purify cursed children, especially twins. That night, Elias returned to the parsonage with a thin folder of documents he'd found in an abandoned drawer behind the pulpit. The pages were brittle, discolored with age, and some were torn, but the handwriting matched that of one Reverend Tobias Merrick, Silas's grandfather. He read aloud by lantern light, lips tight with dread. There have been 4 sets. Always girls. Always born under the pale moon. Always with the mark half-circle birthmark behind the left ear. We bury them before their 6th year. Otherwise, it returns. The cycle. The blood. In my youth, I tried to let them live. The Wilkerson twins. But they began speaking the same words, dreaming the same dreams. We found one of them trying to cut out her own shadow. Said it was too loud. No priest or physician has stopped it. Only the ground. Only the cold. That same night, Judith vanished from her bed. Betty woke just before dawn to find the sheets untouched. Her window unlatched. Snow had gathered in the corners of the room, as if something cold had stepped in. They found her footprints leading to the tree line. Pastor Silas, older than most dared remember, stood silent by the edge of the forest with a single thought pounding in his head like thunder. It's happening again. Deeper still in the woods, Judith stood before the old circle of black earth. She wasn't shivering, wasn't crying, she was waiting. Then, without a sound, the twins emerged from the trees, not the ones recently buried. These were older, dressed in 18th century garb, eyes wide with remembering, and behind them, another set in 1600s Puritan robes, and another native twins with soot-streaked faces and braids down their backs, and more. Judith turned, her breath fogging the air. "You're all me, aren't you?" A girl with silver eyes stepped forward, took Judith's hand, and whispered, "We always find our way back." Then, as a cold wind spiraled through the trees, they vanished. All but Judith. She stood alone once again, eyes darkening. The next morning, only a ring of melted snow remained where Judith had stood, and beneath it, 2 tiny footprints, side by side, identical. Time doesn't forget, it only waits. The townspeople of Black Hollow awoke to a strange phenomenon. Their reflections weren't following them at first. It was small. Reverend Silas noticed it when shaving. His hand raised the blade, but in the mirror, nothing moved. Others saw it too. A woman walking past the bakery let out a scream. In the display window, her reflection stopped walking, but she kept moving. Within hours, mirrors were covered, windows draped in linens. Superstition crawled back from graves everyone thought they'd buried with their ancestors. The baker, Mr. Kessler, boarded up his shop and muttered in terror, "This only happens when the cycle starts again." But the worst was at the orphanage. Elias stood at the edge of the dormitory hallway, clutching the journal that had grown colder in his hands every day. Pages were now sticking together not with moisture, but with what looked like dried salt. He flipped to the final entry again. A single phrase had been burned into the page. "We do not die, we divide." In the reflection of a brass doorknob, he saw something move behind him. When he turned, nothing. Meanwhile, deep beneath the chapel, where the foundation rested atop broken limestone, a hidden crypt was uncovered by a minor earthquake tremor. Stones shifted, revealing a sealed door marked with 2 interlocked crescent moons. Pastor Silas had seen that mark only once before, in the diary of his grandfather. It was the cycle sigil, an ancient warning symbol used by the earliest settlers. A symbol not to protect, but to contain. He opened the door with a prayer on his lips. Inside, 12 coffins, small, child-sized each. One bore a nameplate carved in an unknown script, and beneath each was a symbol of the moon, in different phases, full, eclipsed. But the final coffin had no lid. It had been opened. From the inside, Sister Batia was in the infirmary when the first child screamed. A boy named Caleb had been drawing by the window when he looked up and saw something staring at him through the glass. A girl with no mouth, and eyes that wept blood. He fainted. When Batia reached the window, there were no footprints in the snow. Outside, but pressed against the glass, was a child's handprint. Still warm, Elias gathered the few documents left in the rectory. Baptism records, census rosters, and one forbidden scroll older than the country itself. The scroll, sealed in wax, bore the same crescent sigil. He broke it. Inside was a prophecy. When the daughters of the moon return under the silent snow, and their shadows move before they do, the hollow must burn. For in their death, they do not rest. They awaken. In mirrors, in children, in blood. And when the 13th pair completes the circle, the past will pour into the present, and time will fracture. That night, the wind howled like a choir of weeping children. Judith appeared again, but not as she was. Her eyes were hollow, skin pale as candle wax. Her voice layered with many voices, speaking in echo. We were never meant to die. They made us forget, but we always remember. Pastor, Silas begged, Judith, if there's still a part of you left, please tell us what you want. Judith smiled faintly. I want to go home. Then her face flickered like candlelight, and for a split second, 6 other faces appeared across her skin. Different girls, different centuries, all. Her. Elias stepped forward. Where is home? Judith tilted her head. Where the blood first fell. And so they followed her. Through the forest, past the frozen stream, to the place where the trees grew in unnatural circles. And there, buried beneath a stone altar, they found the truth. Bones. 12 pairs of twins, each set carefully aligned. One twin always missing a hand, as if it had been offered. Beside the bones lay the 13th stone, still unbroken, still waiting. Elias collapsed to his knees. They were sacrifices, he whispered. Silas's voice broke. No, they were the vessels. And Judith, who was no longer Judith, stepped onto the stone, turned to them, and said, Thank you for completing the circle. The air bent. The trees screamed, and Black Hollow changed forever. No one remembers the exact moment time broke. Only that after that night, no clock in the village ever ticked again. When the 13th vessel awakens, the veil will thin, and every life lived before shall seep into now. The stone altar cracked open with a sound like splitting bone. From beneath it, light did not spill, but shadows, thick as oil, poured upward, writhing like serpents. Judith stood in the center, her mouth closed, but voices fluttered out from her, all of them children. Some begged, some laughed, some screamed, and as the sound echoed across the woods, the snow stopped falling mid-air, frozen in place. Time hung in suspension. Elias staggered back. His hand clutched the now burning journal, the pages turning on their own, as if some other hand was flipping through it. Page after page revealed the same phrase, scrawled over and over. She returns in 13, she leaves in none. Sister Batia dropped to her knees and whispered, It's her. It's always been her. The earth began to open around the altar, not a hole, but a spiral of graves, each revealing the twins from generations past, perfectly preserved, eyes wide open, mouths stitched shut. They weren't decomposed, they were waiting. And then the 13th grave opened. It was empty, because the 13th vessel was Elias. Judith turned to him now, no longer just a girl, but a mirror of every child that had died in the cycles before. Her eyes changed colors as she looked at him. Gray, then green, then pitch black. Come back, she said, in 12 voices. You promised. Elias's breath caught. The words struck a nerve buried deeper than memory. He suddenly saw himself not as a boy, but as a man in different centuries. A wounded soldier during the Revolution, a school teacher during the plague, a preacher's son in Salem, and always, with a twin who died. The journal burst into flames in his hand. Sister Batia grabbed his shoulders. Elias, don't listen to her. You're not a vessel, you're the keeper. His hands trembled. I've lived this before. Yes, Batia whispered, tears in her eyes. And every time, you choose wrong. Meanwhile, Pastor Silas descended into the broken crypt beneath the chapel, drawn by a sound he could not explain, like a heartbeat beneath stone. The coffins below had opened, but now, instead of corpses, there were mirrors in each one, clouded, ancient, some cracked, and each mirror showed the same scene: Elias, standing on the stone altar, Judith, reaching out, and the past flickering into the present, like fire catching dry leaves. Silas reached the final coffin. Inside was a mirror shaped like a key. He touched it, and all the mirrors turned toward him. Back in the woods, Judith extended her hand. Her skin was now translucent, veins pulsing with something black and alive. "Take my hand," she whispered, "and we begin again." Elias stepped forward. Bettia sobbed, "Don't let them win again. You're not meant to die for her. You were meant to end her." But Elias looked at Judith and saw someone else behind her eyes, his sister, Sarah, from another life, the one who died in the fire, the one he never saved. And Judith softened, her voice cracked. "You said you'd come back for me." Elisa's heart shattered. This wasn't a monster. This was a memory too powerful to die, a soul trapped in echoes. He stepped forward and placed his palm against hers. The altar lit up with searing white light. Suddenly a shriek from the chapel. The bells rang on their own, each one vibrating at a different frequency. The sky above black, hollow turned red, but not with light, with blood mist falling gently. Like rain, Pastor Silas stumbled into the chapel nave, his skin pale, hands blistered. He held the mirror key. "Break the cycle," he screamed. "Elias, you must seal her before she fully becomes." But it was too late. Judith opened her mouth and screamed. The sound bent the air. Trees cracked, birds fell from the sky, and every child in Black Hollow began to walk toward the woods, as if in a trance. Some came from the orphanage, others from homes, one from a cradle, carried by something invisible. They gathered in a circle around the altar. Elias, still holding Judith's hand, turned to Bettia. "They're not awake." "Not yet," Bettia shouted. "Then put them back to sleep." Silas stumbled forward, raising the mirror key like a weapon. "It must be done through blood, yours or hers." But Elias dropped the mirror. He turned to Judith, or the girl behind her, and whispered, "I didn't forget you." Tears welled in Judith's eyes. The blood vanished from her skin. Her form flickered, and she whispered, "Then we're free." She smiled, just once, and disappeared. The altar collapsed. The graves crumbled. The children fell asleep where they stood, but then the snow started to fall again, and from the darkness behind the trees, a second Judith appeared, younger, smiling, innocent. But her eyes glowed gold, and she said, in a voice older than time, "You chose mercy, but the world doesn't reward kindness. You were only one half of the vessel. Where is the other?" The 13th cycle had not ended. It had just begun. The winter wind howled through the hollow trees as the second Judith stood beneath the broken sky. This one was younger, maybe 7, but her golden eyes glowed with an intelligence that wasn't human. Pastor Silas dropped to one knee, the mirror key melting in his hand like wax. "She's the first," he whispered. "Not a spirit, not a memory, not a victim. She's the origin." Judith tilted her head at Elias. "You were supposed to forget. That was the rule. 13 lives, 13 cycles, and in every one, you chose love." Elias took a step forward, his boots crunching the frost-bitten earth. "Who are you?" She smiled softly. "I am the silence between lifetimes, the tether, the cause, and the cure." Bettia, voice shaking, stepped between them. "You're not her. The Judith we saw, she was broken, lost. But you know exactly what you are." "I always did," said the girl. "Judith was a vessel, but I was the key, and Elias." She turned her eyes to him again, the air growing colder. "You are the lock." The wind surged suddenly, but it wasn't just wind. It carried whispers, names, Thousands of names. Thousands of names. Sarah, Abigail, Matthew, Nora, Samuel. Twins. Always twins. Each one buried, burned, drowned. Yet none of them stayed gone. Bethea screamed as her rosary snapped apart in her hand. Elias, don't listen. She's trying to bind you to her. That's what she's done for centuries. But Elias didn't. He stepped toward the girl, and he remembered everything. In 1792, they were 2 children in Virginia. In 1665, twin orphans abandoned in London. In 1421, brother and sister, burned as witches. In 1855, they had come full circle. But the pattern never changed. They died. Or one lived while the other turned into something else. You tried to stop it once, the girl said. In Salem, you refused to let me burn, and so you cursed us both. Elias's throat went dry. I wanted to protect you. You condemned us instead. Her smile faded. But tonight, we end the game. You will decide. One final time, a 13th altar rose behind her, made not of stone but of flesh, formed from the limbs of the children from every era. Elias's heart pounded. I won't sacrifice anyone else. You must choose, she said. Between what? Elias growled. Death and damnation. She stepped forward, and now her shadow stretched 20 feet long, writhing with whispers. No, she said. Between us and everything else. Bethea shouted. Look around you, Elias. He turned. The forest shimmered like glass. Every tree now held a face in its bark, the children from the past, imprisoned, watching. Their eyes pleaded silently. Judith extended her hand. One last time, one final life. Join me, and we become the world. Elias closed his eyes. Then, he said softly, no. She blinked. He opened his hand. Inside it, a single piece of glass from the shattered mirror key. Judith's eyes widened. That doesn't belong to you. It does now, Elias whispered, and he drove it into his own chest. The forest screamed. Not just Judith, but the trees, the altar, the wind, all of it howled in one shared voice, like a world being torn apart. Elias collapsed. Bethea ran to him, but the light erupted around him, brighter than anything she had ever seen. Judith's body cracked down the center, splitting into shadow and flame. No, she screamed. This is not the end. But Elias was already fading, his body turning into smoke, a smoke made of memory. His final words, it ends, with me, and then silence. Real silence. For the first time in centuries, Black Hollow went still. The trees lost their faces. The children stopped whispering. The sky turned pale blue. No blood, no darkness, just quiet snow. Bethea knelt over Elias's body, or what remained of it, a small pile of ash beside a single open page. From the journal. He broke the mirror, not to see, but to stop being seen. 1 year later, the town of Black Hollow never recovered from that winter. Most families moved away. The chapel burned down in an unexplained lightning storm, but every spring, just as the first snow melts, the children of the town report the same dream, a boy and a girl, standing under a birch tree, holding hands, smiling and whispering. This time, we got it right. Epilogue, 2025. Illinois, a young woman walks through the ruins of an old forest chapel, now a protected historical site. She carries a black and white photo of 2 children, labeled Elias and Judith. 1855. She places the photo in a box and begins filming a TikTok about local legends. So apparently, these twins haunted the area for over 200 years. Crazy, right? Behind her, the trees begin to move. Just slightly, a whisper passes through the air. 13 never truly ends. The wind carries a faint laugh, and the girl, unaware, smiles into her phone.